The winter wind howled down the empty streets of Havenwood, sending loose scraps of paper tumbling across the sidewalks. Nora Dalton pulled her coat tighter around herself, her boots crunching in the thin crust of snow that had already started to gather. Her shift at the diner had run late again, and now the cold bit at her cheeks, sharp and merciless. As she hurried past the corner of Main and Cedar, something in the shadows caught her eye, a bundle of cloth, a flicker of movement. She slowed, heart thudding. A man. Hunched against the brick wall, barely moving, a homeless man shivering violently under a threadbare coat. Nora hesitated. The streets were nearly deserted. She could keep walking. It would be easier, safer. But something inside her wouldn't let her. Her father, Sheriff Dalton, had raised her better than that, even if he was no longer around to remind her. She stepped cautiously closer. The man's face was barely visible beneath the tangled mess of his gray hair and the grime that coated his skin, but his eyes, haunted, desperate, lifted to meet hers. Nora's heart clenched. Without thinking, she shrugged off her scarf and knelt beside him. "You'll freeze to death out here," she whispered, wrapping the thick wool around his shoulders. The man flinched at first, as if her touch burned him, but then, slowly, he let her cover him. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a dry rasp. His body trembled uncontrollably. Nora scanned the street, looking for help. There was none. The diner was 3 blocks back. Her apartment even further. There was only one place nearby, the old maintenance shed behind the town library. "You need to get out of this cold," she said urgently. She helped him to his feet, surprised by how light he was, how fragile. Step by careful step, she half carried, half led him down the alley. The snow swirled around them, thickening into a blinding storm. Every instinct screamed at her that she was insane for doing this. She didn't even know him. But her conscience refused to let her abandon him to die in the street. As they stumbled into the dark, abandoned shed, Nora pulled a dusty tarp over the broken windows to block out the worst of the wind. She found a battered old cot and helped him onto it. In the dim light, she finally got a better look at him. His cheekbones sharp from hunger, deep lines carving his face. Something about him stirred a strange feeling inside her, a memory she couldn't quite reach. And just as she sat down to catch her breath, the man whispered a name under his breath, a name that made the blood drain from her face. It was her father's name. Nora sat frozen, her breath misting in the cold air of the old shed. She stared at the man lying on the cot, her heart hammering against her ribs. Had she heard him right? The name he whispered wasn't common. It wasn't one that could have belonged to just anyone. Dalton, he had said, her father's last name. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he had known her father once, years ago. Maybe he was just confused, delirious from the cold. But deep inside, a sliver of fear twisted into something sharper, recognition. She shook herself, wrapping her arms tighter around her body for warmth. "You know Sheriff Dalton?" she asked softly, barely above a whisper. The homeless man didn't respond. His eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow but steady. Nora wasn't sure if he was asleep, unconscious, or simply unwilling to speak. She glanced around the dusty shed. It would barely hold the heat from their bodies, but it was better than the streets. Better than dying out there alone. Still, every instinct in her screamed that she was standing on the edge of something dangerous. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the shed. In a corner, she found an old metal cabinet, rusted but still standing. She opened it and found a few worn blankets and a cracked thermos. Wrapping another blanket around the man, she gently placed the thermos near him, hoping it might still hold some warmth inside. As she worked, she couldn't help stealing glances at his face, the way the deep lines carved stories she couldn't read, the scars half hidden beneath the dirt. He had lived a hard life. But why had his path crossed hers tonight? Memories of her father flooded back, unbidden. Sheriff Dalton had been respected, even feared, in Havenwood. Fair but unyielding. He had made enemies in his time, dangerous ones. Nora remembered overhearing hushed conversations late at night, her mother begging him to be careful. "Not everyone forgives, Hank," she would say. As a child, Nora had never understood. As an adult, she had simply accepted that her father's life had been complicated. But now, the puzzle pieces shifted in her mind, forming dark, unfinished shapes she wasn't ready to face. She sat beside the man again, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. She should leave, she thought. Walk away. Let the authorities handle this. But something deeper anchored her there. Guilt, compassion, or maybe the nagging feeling that this night was no accident. As she drifted into a restless sleep, curled up against the wall, she didn't see the man open his eyes just a crack. Didn't see the look of recognition, sharp, painful recognition, as he gazed at her face in the dim light. He knew exactly who she was. When Nora woke, her body ached from the cold and the hard floor beneath her. The dim gray light of dawn crept through the broken seams of the shed. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, and turned to the cot where the homeless man lay. Relief flooded her chest. He was still there, breathing though shallowly. His eyes were closed, his face slack in exhausted sleep. For a moment, Nora considered whether she had imagined the whole thing, the whispered name, the flicker of recognition. But deep down, she knew better. Something real had stirred last night, something too raw to dismiss. She rubbed her numb hands together and stood, peering out through a crack in the door. Snow blanketed the streets in soft white silence, untouched by any footsteps except their own from the night before. The world looked clean, pure. A stark contrast to the tangled mess of questions gnawing inside her. Nora chewed her lip, torn. Should she call someone? Take him to the hospital? Would they even care? In Havenwood, people liked to keep their problems invisible, tucked neatly behind polite smiles. Helping a homeless man would draw questions. Involving her father's name could tear open old wounds that the town had long since buried. Turning back to him, she knelt down beside the cot. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly in the cold air. To her surprise, his eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, he opened them, meeting her gaze with startling clarity. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The unspoken tension between them was almost physical, heavy and crackling like a live wire. Then, in a hoarse voice rough with disuse, he muttered two words that made Nora's blood turn to ice. "James Carter," he said. The name hit her like a slap. Memories slammed into her. Memories of her father, standing tall and grim in their kitchen, talking in hushed, angry tones with other men in uniform. James Carter. She remembered hearing that name once, long ago, in a whisper thick with bitterness. A man her father had hunted, had feared, and had never forgiven. A man tied to betrayal, to blood, to scars the town never spoke of aloud. Her hands trembled as she stared at him, the fragile, broken man lying before her. Could it really be him? "You're lying," Nora whispered, shaking her head. She wanted to stand up, to back away, but her legs wouldn't obey. Carter's eyes stayed locked on hers, full of something she couldn't quite name. Regret, perhaps, or sorrow. Maybe something darker. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He just looked at her like he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. And then, his voice a barely audible rasp, he said something that rooted her to the spot. "I owe you the truth, and your father my life." Nora's throat tightened. She struggled to process the words that hung heavy in the freezing air between them. "You owe him your life?" she repeated, her voice low, almost breaking. James Carter, her father's greatest enemy, lying helpless before her, whispering about debts and truths she had never known existed. She wanted to demand answers, scream at him for daring to speak her father's name. But something about his brokenness, the hollow pain behind his eyes, stopped her. Instead, she swallowed hard and sat back on her heels, heart pounding in her ears. Carter shifted slightly, grimacing from the effort. "It's a long story," he rasped. "One I should have told a long time ago." His gaze drifted to the ceiling as if seeing something far beyond the rotting boards. Nora waited, unwilling to help him but unable to leave. A lifetime of warnings from her father clashed with the instincts in her chest. She needed to understand. She needed to know why a man who should have hated her was looking at her with something that almost resembled shame. He took a shallow breath, the words seeming to cost him. "I wasn't always like this," he began. "I had a family, a wife, a son." His voice cracked, and he closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. "But I lost them. Stupidity, greed, anger, it all swallowed me whole. I made enemies, hurt people. Your father tried to stop me, tried to save me. But I couldn't be saved." His hands fidgeted weakly with the frayed edge of the blanket Nora had wrapped around him, as if grounding himself in the present while being dragged backward into a past he couldn't escape. Nora felt the cold seep deeper into her bones. Her mind raced. Her father had always been a man of strict justice and loyalty. If he had once tried to save James Carter, and Carter had thrown it away, what had happened between them to turn mercy into hatred? "If you owed him your life," she said carefully, "then why did he hate you so much?" Carter opened his mouth, then closed it again, like the words refused to come. His entire body seemed to sag under the weight of guilt, of old wounds left to rot in silence. Before he could answer, a loud knock startled them both. Nora jerked her head toward the door. Someone was there, sharp, insistent. Not the casual knock of a passerby, but a demand. She rose slowly, heart slamming against her ribs. No one should know they were here. No one should be looking for them. Carter's face drained of what little color it had left. He gripped her wrist with surprising strength, pulling her back. "Don't open it," he hissed, fear flashing across his sunken features. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Nora froze, her entire body tense as Carter's urgent grip tightened around her wrist. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing off the brittle walls of the abandoned shed. She looked toward the door, her mind racing. Who could it be? A good Samaritan, maybe someone seeing the light through the cracks? But deep down, she knew better. Nothing about this night had felt like coincidence. She glanced down at Carter, whose face was drawn tight with fear. If he, a man who had survived the streets, was afraid, then she had every reason to be as well. "We can't stay here," she whispered, pulling her arm free. Her instincts screamed at her to move, to hide. Without another word, she helped Carter to his feet. He wobbled, almost collapsing, but with her support, he managed a few shuffling steps. They stumbled toward the back of the shed, where a broken window opened onto a narrow alley choked with snow and shadows. Nora shoved the window up with her shoulder, ignoring the sharp sting as a splinter bit into her hand. Time was running out. Behind them, the door rattled under another, heavier knock. As they slipped out into the alley, the freezing wind slashed at them like knives. Carter leaned heavily against her, and Nora's breath came in quick, panicked gasps. They stumbled through the deepening snow, past dumpsters and rusted metal barrels, their only cover the darkness and the falling snow. She dared a glance back at the shed just in time to see the door crash open. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the faint light. Nora's heart hammered in her chest. Whoever it was, they weren't here to help. "Keep moving," Carter rasped beside her. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a desperation that pushed her forward. They weaved through the alley, slipping and stumbling, until they emerged onto a side street. The town was still asleep, the early hour and the storm keeping everyone indoors. Nora spotted an old laundromat across the street. Dark, deserted. She half-dragged Carter toward it, praying the door would be unlocked. Her fingers were numb and clumsy, but the handle turned, and they slipped inside, the heavy door groaning shut behind them. Inside, the laundromat smelled of detergent and mildew. Rows of dead machines lined the walls, and a single flickering light buzzed overhead. Nora guided Carter to a bench and sank down beside him, her body trembling from exertion and fear. For a moment, they simply sat there, breathing hard, listening for any sign that they had been followed. But the streets outside remained silent. Nora turned to Carter, her voice shaking. "Who's after you?" she demanded. Carter lifted his head slowly, his eyes haunted. "Not just me," he said, voice hollow. "They're after you too, because of who your father really was." Nora stared at Carter, her mind reeling. "What do you mean, because of my father?" she demanded, her voice louder than she intended. It echoed off the cold walls of the laundromat, making her wince. Carter shifted uncomfortably on the bench, his breath coming in shallow gasps. For a moment, he looked as if he might refuse to answer, might pull the truth deeper inside himself where it could never be found. But then, with a deep, shuddering sigh, he spoke. "Your father wasn't just a sheriff, Nora," he said. "He was involved in things that went far beyond this town." Nora shook her head automatically, refusing to believe it. Her father had been strict, yes. Tough, even ruthless when he needed to be. But corrupt? Secretive? It didn't fit the man she remembered. "You're lying," she said, though the words felt thin and weak in her mouth. Carter's gaze was steady, almost pitying. "I wish I was," he murmured. "He was a good man, at first. But the people he crossed, people who didn't want the law getting too close to their business, they made sure he owed them. And once you owe them, you never get free." The cold inside Nora deepened, settling into her bones. She wanted to get up, to run from Carter and his poisonous words. But a part of her, the part that had always wondered why her father had come home some nights with bruises he refused to explain, or why he would stand for hours in the backyard staring into the dark, knew there was truth here. "What kind of people?" she whispered. "What did he get into?" Carter wiped a trembling hand across his mouth. "Smuggling," he said finally. "Information. People. Sometimes worse. At first he fought it, tried to protect the town. But when they threatened your mother—" He broke off, coughing harshly. Nora sat back, stunned. Her mother had died young, officially of an illness. But what if that had only been part of the truth? What if the threats had eaten away at their family from the inside long before disease had touched them? Her head spun. Everything she had believed about her father, about her own childhood, was unraveling before her eyes. "Why now?" she asked hoarsely. "Why, after all these years, would they come after me?" Carter leaned closer, his face grave. "Because they think your father left something behind. Something dangerous. And they believe you know where it is." Nora's blood ran cold. She shook her head violently. "I don't know anything," she insisted. Carter's mouth twisted into a grim smile. "They won't believe that. They never do." Before Nora could respond, the sound of shattering glass ripped through the laundromat. She turned just in time to see a dark figure forcing its way through the broken front door. Nora barely had time to react. The figure stepped through the shattered doorway, the dim light glinting off something metallic in his hand. A gun. She sucked in a sharp breath and instinctively grabbed Carter's arm, yanking him to his feet. His legs wobbled under him, but adrenaline seemed to surge through his frail body as he stumbled forward with her. "Back door," Carter rasped urgently. Nora didn't hesitate. She half-dragged, half-pushed him toward the narrow hallway behind the rows of silent washers, praying there was another way out. The man shouted something behind them, but Nora didn't stop to listen. Her heart thundered in her ears as they shoved through the hallway door and into a cramped storage room filled with broken vending machines and battered chairs. Frantically, she scanned the walls. There, a service exit, nearly hidden behind a toppled rack of plastic crates. "Help me," she gasped, shoving the crates aside. Carter, despite his weakness, threw his weight against the door. It groaned, sticking for a terrifying second, before finally swinging open with a screech. Cold air slammed into them as they stumbled outside. They were in a narrow alley lined with dumpsters and frozen puddles. Nora heard the footsteps pounding behind them and knew they had only seconds. "This way," she hissed, pulling Carter down the alley, her boots slipping on the ice. Her lungs burned, but she didn't dare slow down. Every instinct screamed that if the man caught them, there would be no second chances. Somewhere behind them, the door slammed open again, and angry curses filled the air. They rounded a corner and Nora spotted an open basement stairwell leading down beneath a dark, boarded-up building. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and maybe if they were lucky, it would be enough to hide them. She guided Carter down the icy steps, wincing with every creak and crunch underfoot. They reached a rusted metal door. Nora pushed, locked. Desperate, she spotted a loose window beside it, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "You first," she whispered, helping Carter awkwardly through the gap. He disappeared into the darkness inside, and Nora struggled after him, scraping her coat and hands on the rough frame. Inside, it was freezing and pitch black, filled with the sharp smell of mold and rust. Nora pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. She could hear footsteps approaching the alley above, slow, deliberate. They weren't safe yet. Carter shifted beside her, his breath ragged. In the darkness, his hand found hers, squeezing once, a silent message: "Stay quiet, stay still." For several long minutes, they waited, barely breathing. Then, just when Nora thought the danger had passed, a voice drifted down into the basement, low, cold, and far too familiar. A voice she hadn't heard in years. Her father's voice. Nora's body turned to stone. She pressed her back harder against the cold basement wall, heart hammering so violently she was sure whoever was above could hear it. It couldn't be. Her father was dead. She had stood at his funeral, had thrown dirt onto his coffin with trembling hands. Yet the voice drifting down the stairwell was unmistakable, deep, authoritative, carrying that familiar sharp edge. She felt Carter stiffen beside her, his hand tightening painfully around hers. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. The footsteps above moved slowly, as if whoever it was knew they were close. Nora's mind raced. Was she hearing things? Had the fear and exhaustion finally pushed her over the edge? Or was it something more sinister, something she couldn't yet understand? She turned her head slightly, trying to catch Carter's eyes in the darkness, but it was too black to see more than the outline of his shape. She could feel his tension, though, thrumming in the thin space between them like a live wire. The voice called out again, low and coaxing this time. "Nora, you don't have to hide. Come out. We can end this." She bit down on her lip to keep from gasping. That voice knew her name. That voice expected her. Beside her, Carter shifted, drawing a shaky breath. "It's not him," he whispered so softly she barely heard it. "It's someone who knows how to use your memories against you." The words chilled her more than the winter air. Whoever was out there wasn't just looking for them, they were hunting them. A loud crash upstairs shattered the moment. The sound of a metal garbage can being kicked echoed through the alley. Heavy boots thudded against the floor above, moving away from the stairwell. Nora barely dared breathe until the footsteps faded into the distance. Only then did she slump slightly, feeling her muscles shake with delayed terror. Carter pulled her closer, his voice a broken rasp in her ear. "We have to move. They won't stop until they have you, or what they think you have." "What do they think I have?" Nora asked, her voice cracking. The question had burned inside her since Carter had first mentioned the something her father had left behind. She had no idea what it could be. No hidden treasure, no whispered secrets she could recall. But the fear in Carter's face told her that ignorance wouldn't save her. Carter hesitated, then said, "Proof. Evidence your father hid. Against them. Against all of them." Nora stared at him, realization dawning. Her childhood memories, those late nights, the hushed conversations, the locked drawer in her father's study, came rushing back with terrifying clarity. And she realized, with a sick twist of fear, that they weren't running from ghosts. They were running from the living. The abandoned basement seemed to close in around them, the walls whispering with old, rotting secrets. Nora's mind raced faster than her pounding heart. Proof. Evidence her father had hidden. Something powerful enough that after all these years, dangerous people were still willing to chase it. She stared into the dark, seeing not the cold walls of the basement, but the blurred memories of her childhood. Locked drawers. Late-night visitors. Strange arguments she hadn't understood then, but now took on a chilling clarity. "We have to go back," Nora said suddenly, her voice steady despite the fear knotting her stomach. Carter turned his head toward her, confusion etched in every line of his face. "Back where?" he rasped. "Home," she answered. "To the old house." Her father's study had been left untouched after his death, sealed like a tomb. Maybe because deep down, Nora had been afraid of what she might find there. But now there was no choice. If the answers were anywhere, they would be there, hidden among the life he had tried to shield her from. Getting there was a risk, maybe the biggest they had taken yet. But staying hidden was no longer an option. Carter nodded once, grimly, and together they crept back through the broken window, into the freezing alley. The streets were eerily silent, muffled under a fresh layer of snow. Moving quickly but cautiously, they made their way across town, sticking to the shadows. Every shifting silhouette, every distant engine hum, made Nora's skin crawl. But somehow, they weren't stopped. The Dalton house stood at the end of Maple Street, a gray silhouette against the overcast sky. The windows were dark, the front porch sagging slightly under the weight of years of neglect. Nora swallowed hard as she approached. Memories pressed against her. The scent of her mother's baking, the low murmur of her father's late-night phone calls. She pushed the front door open with a trembling hand. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing through the hollow house. Inside, the air was thick with dust and cold. Every creaking floorboard under their feet sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Nora led the way to her father's study at the back of the house. The door was still locked. She reached up to the wooden frame, feeling under the molding where she remembered a key being hidden long ago. Her fingers found it, cold, tiny, and familiar. Heart hammering, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and old paper. Her father's desk sat untouched, a heavy monolith against the wall. And there, tucked beneath it, just as she had seen as a little girl but never questioned, was a loose floorboard. Nora knelt down, prying it open with shaking hands. A small, battered box lay hidden inside. She reached for it, but Carter's sharp intake of breath stopped her. Behind them, the front door slammed open, and heavy footsteps stormed into the house. Nora's heart lurched into her throat. The box was in her hands, cold and trembling, but the sound of heavy boots thundering through the house ripped her back to the present. She shoved the box inside her coat just as Carter grabbed her arm, pulling her up. "Go," he hissed. They darted out of the study just as a dark figure appeared at the other end of the hall, a man in a long black coat, his face shadowed but his intent clear. He raised something that glinted in the dim light, a gun. Without thinking, Nora yanked Carter through the nearest door, slamming it behind them. They found themselves in the narrow laundry room at the back of the house, the only exit a tiny window above the sink. Nora glanced at Carter. He was pale, gasping, barely able to stand. There was no way they both would get out fast enough. She turned back toward the door, heart hammering. "Give me the box," Carter gasped. "You run. I'll hold them off." "No," she cried, clutching the box tighter. But Carter's eyes were fierce for the first time since she met him, a burning, desperate fire. "Your father trusted me once," he rasped. "I won't fail him again." Tears blurred Nora's vision as she climbed onto the counter, pried open the window, and wriggled through into the freezing morning air. She turned back just as Carter slammed the laundry room door shut behind her. A shot rang out, making her flinch violently. She didn't wait to see more. She ran. The street spun around her, but she held onto the box like a lifeline. Snow crunched under her boots as she fled through backyards and narrow alleys, not stopping until she collapsed behind the old town church. Safe, for now. With trembling fingers, she pulled the battered box from under her coat. For a moment, she hesitated. Whatever secrets it held would change everything she thought she knew about her father, and about herself. But there was no going back. She opened it. Inside, neatly stacked, were faded documents, old photographs, and a worn cassette tape. Names. Faces. Records of crimes that had been buried deep to protect the powerful. Proof that the men who had once controlled Havenwood, and beyond, were not the heroes people believed. Her father hadn't been one of them. He had fought against them and died for it. And now, Nora held the truth in her hands. Tears streamed down her face, a strange mix of grief, pride, and overwhelming responsibility. She thought of Carter, of the price he had paid to help her escape. She thought of the town that had tried to forget. Nora rose slowly to her feet, clutching the box to her chest. She would not hide. She would finish what her father had started. Some truths were meant to be buried, but others were meant to set the world on fire.